An independent investigation into the US Capitol riots has been blocked by Republicans almost 6 months to the day since the insurrection. Democrats say it's because the shadow of former US President Donald Trump is still looming over the party. Correspondent Michael Genovese has more.
How did hundreds of rioters breach the US Capitol? Nearly 6 months on, Democrats want answers, but not enough Republicans do.
The motion is not agreed to.
GOP senators blocking the country's only chance at an independent investigation into the January 6 riot. The commission would have consisted of a panel of independent experts with subpoena powers, similar to the probe that followed September 11.
Three weeks before President Biden's high-stakes sit-down with Russian President Putin, tonight we're learning more about what appears to be another Russian cyber attack on the U.S. government. According to Microsoft, hackers targeted 3,000 email accounts to try to burrow into human rights groups and organizations that have been critical of Putin, sending phishing emails like this one, posing as the U.S. International Aid Agency. If users clicked on the link, hackers could gain access to their computers, potentially stealing data or infecting other computers on the network.
Clearly, the bulk of this attack is about collecting information to give Russia a strategic advantage. But the second aim seemed to be to try to embarrass the United States and show that they are still messing around in our networks.
The U.S. has not confirmed that Russia is responsible.
Russia denies blocking some flights that avoided Belarusian airspace, saying purely technical reasons were at play here. Airlines, including Air France, said flights had been refused clearance after their paths made a detour around Russia's neighbor. The EU told carriers to avoid flying over Belarus after it forced a commercial jet to land and arrested an opposition activist aboard. Russia is Belarus's regime main backer. Meanwhile, Air France cancelled another flight from Paris to Moscow that would have skipped Belarusian airspace.
Belarus President Alexander Lukashenko is seeking to cement his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin's support as the two prepare to meet in Sochi today. Now, this will be their fourth in-person meeting since anti-government protests began in Belarus last year. Now, the talks come as the European Union prepares to impose sanctions on Belarus for forcing a Ryanair flight to land in Minsk and then arresting a popular dissident who was on board. However, Lukashenko has said that economic issues are on the agenda of the meeting with Putin. Earlier, Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin met his Belarusian counterpart in Minsk, and he condemned the EU sanctions on the ex-Soviet nation, saying that they were unilateral.
The UK's new $4.2 billion aircraft carrier is underway on its maiden voyage, an 8-month tour that will cross through the South China Sea and in doing so send a clear signal to Beijing. Fighter jets took off from the deck of the HMS Queen Elizabeth this week in the Mediterranean as part of NATO exercises. Watching the drills was NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg himself. China claims 90% of the South China Sea, although several regional countries contest the boundaries, and the US has regularly sent warships through the area.
Canada is sending $25 million in aid to Palestinians. Ottawa says the money will go to those affected by the recent violence in Gaza and to those in the West Bank. Karina Gould is the Minister of International Development.
So the $25 million that I announced today has three parts to it. The first is $10 million for the immediate humanitarian needs, like psychosocial support for children in particular, immediate food assistance, and health response. The next is $10 million that will be used over the coming weeks and months for kind of initial reconstruction efforts, and then $5 million for peace building efforts.
Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro once again demanded a return to normality on Thursday, now threatening to involve the military against any local governments, announcing new lockdowns in the midst of a new brutal wave of COVID-19. This adds to concerns over Bolsonaro's unprecedented attempts to politicize the military. In the northern Amazonas state, Bolsonaro hinted at his threat to the armed forces. Bolsonaro reiterated that freedom in Brazil is in the hands of the military. The far-right president aims to run for re-election next year, though he has been widely criticized for his handling of the pandemic, including opposing lockdowns. Brazil has reported more than 450,000 deaths since the pandemic began.
From the sky, the true extent of Malaysia's latest COVID surge is seen at its worst. Row upon row of burial plots at this Muslim cemetery for coronavirus victims on the outskirts of Kuala Lumpur serves as a stark reminder the Southeast Asian nation is experiencing its worst outbreak since the start of the pandemic. Muhammad Rafiuddin Zainul Rasid is a religious leader, also known as the cleric undertaker. His team of more than 2,000 volunteers make up the Malaysian Funeral Management Squad. Dressed in head-to-toe PPE, the volunteers go from the hospital to the morgue to prepare the bodies for burial and also perform Muslim prayers at the cemetery. But as the number of deaths continue to surge, it can be difficult to bury the body within 24 hours, as is typical under Islam.
New developments after the deadly mass shooting at the VTA rail yard in San Jose, California. Investigators finding a massive arsenal at the attacker's home. The city in mourning as well. Hundreds at a vigil for the 9 lives lost. VTA workers wearing T-shirts with the faces of their fallen colleagues. And new surveillance video showing the gunman walking calmly in the middle of his killing spree. Here's ABC's Kaylee Hartung in San Jose.
Tonight, the first look at the arsenal the gunman amassed in San Jose. Investigators finding multiple cans of gasoline, a dozen firearms, and 25,000 rounds of ammunition at the home of the Transportation Authority employee who killed 9 of his co-workers.
Authorities have recovered explosive devices, Molotov cocktails at the gunman's home just behind me. That popping sound you just heard, that was a suspicious device being detonated.
Today, 3 Tacoma police officers in a familiar setting of appearing before a judge, but in the unfamiliar role of being suspects themselves, in shackles and wearing orange prisoner jumpsuits.
The court agrees it's a serious violent offense.
2 officers facing multiple charges, including second-degree murder. A 3rd officer charged with first-degree manslaughter. The charges are tied to the violent confrontation and death of Manuel Ellis, another black man begging to breathe.
Can't breathe, sir. Can't breathe.
Ellis beaten and tased before his hands and feet were bound, writhing in pain. An autopsy concluding he died from a lack of oxygen due to physical restraint.
Put your hands behind your back.
There were no police body cameras, and it's unclear why officers got into the confrontation with Ellis, who was walking after a trip to the convenience store.